Hey, everybody. Welcome to Tech Talk AI with Nate and Mike. I'm Michael Krigsman and my friend Nate.
Yep, I'm Nate Jones. This is the second one of these that we have done. You guys had so many questions that Mike and I decided to do a whole extra 30 minutes on this live stream. And, this is an experiment for us in public. Both of us have done our own shows for a bit, and we have so much fun talking together that we thought, why not do something together semi-regularly and see how it goes? So, our first one, we both had a ton of fun. We got too many questions for the hour, so we're going 90 minutes this time. What are we starting with, Mike?
Well, we need to talk about Nano Banana,
Yeah.
which is such a, I mean, who comes up with that?
Don't know. I think honestly it was the throwaway code name that they used in the arena, and it was so much better than what they actually had planned on using. They stuck with it, and now there's banana emojis in Google Gemini.
I have to say, I've been working with software companies for too long.
Hmm.
And they come up with interesting code names, but then it becomes all corporate. Inside they
Hmm.
can have fun, but then we release it in public.
To be
And
that interesting, right?
yeah, we need to have our suit and tie on. So I like Nano Banana.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a fun name, and it clearly has struck a chord. It's been wild how many people have figured out what image models can do simply because, and what's interesting is it's not because it's a particularly good model at creating images, it's just a phenomenally good editor. And that seems to have been a real click point.
It's it's a but it's also really good at, I was going to say creating images, but there's so many models that do that pretty
Hmm.
darn well
Hmm.
right now. So I think you're right. It's the taking of an image and changing the context.
That's right. That's right. In fact, I think you have an example that we were playing with before. Do you want to show like some of the progression with Nano Banana? I think sometimes, like especially with image models, a picture is much more useful than just talking about it.
Okay, I'm going to show some pictures, uh, but before I do that, I just want to tell people, ask your questions because I'm
Yes.
I'm on LinkedIn and I'm seeing the questions starting to come in, the comments.
Amazing.
And last time we didn't have enough time to get to everybody's questions, and we're going to really focus on the questions. So
That's
ask
right.
your questions, and but let's take a look at some of these nano bananoids, we can call them. Okay, so here's a picture of me. Oops, hold on. This is hardly scripted. You can see it's advancing. Okay, so there's me, just very corporate. But sometimes a you need a beard, right, Nate? And you need
You need a beard.
long hair.
You do.
And but we did it. Okay. But sometimes also you need to be in a European pub in a green jacket with red glasses smoking a cigar and a hat. And I think this is pretty good. And by the way, you probably can't see this easily, but if you look around the edge of the top of the hat, I told it to backlight the hat. So it did it.
Nice.
And of course, the obligatory picture of the guy in the green jacket smoking a cigar and a hat, plowing the fields, getting back to his roots. And so we have that.
Mhm.
But sometimes you need a red suit and
True.
plowing the fields in a red suit. But then again, what about sustainability? And sometimes you need to take your horses and your plow and your red suit and
Hmm.
do it under the sea. So we've got that. And what else do we have? Oh, of course, plow the fields on the moon. Looks pretty good.
Hmm.
And, but in a spacesuit, no less. There's only two more here in the red suit. And finally, this is really the most interesting one. I've got three arms, but I still have my beard and my hat and my long flowing now red hair. So it's got three arms. So, Nate, yeah, context, but what about the three arms thing?
One of the things that I have observed if you're not careful with prompting and you're just sort of prompting successively, I'm going to guess that you prompted successively and these are image sort of modifications.
Yes.
It starts to lose the original context of the image by the time you get to a certain point in the modification loop. And you're not necessarily telling it, I need you to keep all of these things the same and only change this. I'm going to guess it was a more casual prompt and you were just like, I don't know, put me on the moon, right? And that starts to break down over too many iterations, even in an image editor as good as Nano Banana. And part of why is because image generation models, just like language models, are trained on single turn conversations. So all the reinforcement learning they get is ask for a thing, get a thing back. Done. End of conversation. And so this whole idea of an ongoing conversation is not really something any of the models are trained for.
Yeah, well, it's this ongoing conversation with these images that is what really makes this valuable. Because if we think about our text interactions, it's the
Mm-hmm.
iteration, right? You ask it a
Right.
question and then you iterate. You're not just generating a static report. You can do that with using deep research, but
Mm-hmm.
it's the iteration. And it's the iteration with the images. Oh, change the lighting here. That will make it
Mm-hmm.
so useful for, say, marketers.
Right. Right. Exactly.
On LinkedIn, Gustavo Salami
Mm-hmm.
says that his theory is that regarding, I think, the Nano Banana name, is they first released it as Gemini Flash preview image. And actually, I remember that as well. And then eventually, after a few days, they changed the name on Gemini and
Yep.
AI Studio to the banana symbolism.
Yep. That's
Uh,
true.
yeah, because I remember going there initially, and it was Flash Studio
I, I don't know what they were
or
doing it. I wish I
Flash
knew the
Preview.
answer. I think that would be fascinating to hear why they decided to make that change because it was clearly a very impactful choice. And I don't think we really have the answer there.
Hey, I have a request for the people who are watching, especially if you're asking questions on LinkedIn. Send a LinkedIn connection request to me and to Nate so that we can invite you to the next one. Because if you're not a
Mhm.
direct connection, then when we do this again, we don't have a way to invite you, and we'd love to do that directly. So,
Yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
no, I was going to say Greg Walters on LinkedIn is asking us to dive into that MIT report versus reality. He says his belief is that AI cannot be implemented in the old ways, centralized, top down, and software as a service. He thinks, but he's not sure, that the best AI LLMs, the approach is ground up, which is problematic. So implementation. Should we talk about about that report for a moment?
I think we should probably set up what the report is because I want to make sure we all level set on the context. And I think yeah, it's worth getting into that and then getting into the question after that.
Okay, so this report came out, and you can easily search on, if you want to find it,
Mhm.
MIT AI failures report, and it will come up. And it said that 95% of Gen AI projects are not delivering value. And it gave two fundamental reasons for this. Number one, I'm paraphrasing here, and this is a
Sure.
long research study, and I'm giving you a very high level synopsis here. So don't kill me for simplifying this. Uh, AI number one is not sufficiently embedded in processes,
Hmm.
which means you haven't figured out how to integrate AI into what people actually do. So it's like a graft on or a toy. Oh, let's do this over here to the side.
Hmm.
And then an interesting point number two is that the conventional wrong wisdom is that we need to build our, custom built, custom made tools. And custom built tools failed more than off the shelf
Yep.
tools.
The other thing we are probably remiss if we don't mention is that the sample size in this particular report was not very large. So we're talking about, a couple of dozen. There was not like this is. I think people sometimes think thousands of companies were surveyed, and this is what they said. It was actually different. It was a sit-down conversation with a much smaller number of companies to dive into what was going on and why at those organizations. And I think that's very interesting, but I think people sometimes interpret it as if it were a gigantic survey.
Yeah, I mean, I think, oh, welcome, Brian Mosley. I'm just reading through the comments. It's one of it's one of the few popular studies on AI failure. And
Mm,
failure is easier to talk about and kind of more fun in a lot of ways. It's more salacious.
it is.
So, right, so we grasp onto it, but still the points are I think very accurate. And there's
Hmm.
nothing new about this. This is human nature. If you don't take AI and embed it in what you're actually doing, then how is it going to make you more productive? It's actually going to slow you down because now you're all in learning mode and changing.
That's right. That's right. And I think that, like, to go back to sort of the original question that we got, I would agree that one of the things we're learning about the nature of this general purpose technology in Chat GPT and LLMs in general is that they are bringing with them their own expectations of workflow changes that are so powerful they extend into organizational dynamics. And so one of the things I've written about a little bit on the Substack is this idea that we have expectations of organizational reporting structures, expectations of leadership, expectations of how change works that are, frankly, if you dig into it, hundreds of years old inside the sort of history of the corporation. Those are now being somewhat challenged because of the flattening effect of having a machine that speaks language. And we don't really understand all of the implications of that yet.
Yeah, well, we have a history of how we do things, and
Hmm.
that history of process, which is that's what it is. It's a
It's a
history of
history of process. That's exactly right, Mike.
right of processes and data. That's what has enabled companies to create products on a
Hmm.
repeatable basis and to scale. And but this is not an AI issue. This is a core issue of innovation and disrupting myself and just disrupting oneself or one's business. I know we
Yep.
want to talk about the AI aspects, but you can't divorce it from the rest of daily reality.
No, you can't. And in many ways, when I am talking to a company about AI these days, we have the initial conversation, and the presenting issue is always we're not doing enough AI, or we want to do AI in this way or that way. But when you start to peel the onion, when you have a couple of conversations, what we find, like 9 times out of 10, is that it's a culture issue. It's a people issue first, and then the technology flows from getting the culture and people issues solved.
Yeah, well, that's always the case. But again, historically, that's that's basically the issue here is how do you drive change? How do you
Hmm.
disrupt yourself? But let's jump to some questions
Sure.
on LinkedIn here. And hey, folks who are listening, if you have better suggestions than LinkedIn for this, please let us just
We
send
don't
me
want
a
to send
note.
everybody to LinkedIn for questions if we can avoid it, but we haven't found a better solution.
Yeah, so if you have a better solution, tell us. So, and I'm hoping I'm not missing anybody here. Christian Perez. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Christian Dondino asks Nate, are you seeing the questions on Substack? And I responded that you're not. And can Christian ask people to come here?
Yeah, I'm actually looking in my chat. I'm not necessarily seeing questions other places. I'm wondering I'm wondering if there's another place I can look. So I'm digging to look and see if I can find that. But for now, come over to LinkedIn where we know that we can see it. Um, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see here. Christian Perez says he thoroughly enjoys making fun images with AI as well as writing with AI. Consumers, however, seem to have a filter for it. They'll say, oh, that's AI, and it becomes a product of lower caliber, for lack
Hmm.
of a better word. Is this because we haven't crossed the uncanny valley, or do we innately value human made creative works, or are we just seeing the transition phase and future generations will just accept AI art by default?
So really like three or four questions in one there. I do think we're in the middle of the uncanny valley. I don't think it's that I don't think it's the case that we anyone who suggests we're early in the uncanny valley, I think hasn't seen what AI can do. I tend to be of the persuasion that art is what people make of it. So art is what the artist is going to choose to create with, and I think that future generations will probably look at digital tools as tools for art in some cases. And I also think that we're a tangible enough species that physical tools for art aren't going away. This is actually a very real story I have. There's a local mural painter who's very famous in my town, and he is going to come by and put a mural on my house at some point in the next few days. And that is a physical thing, right? He's going to get out the paint. He's actually going to put something on the house, and that's he's so famous that like it's something that like everyone in town loves, and it's considered public art. That kind of experience knits a community together. It's not something that you can sort of easily replicate, but I don't think that undercuts the fact that digital art is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger with AI tooling.
Yeah, part of it is we are in this transition, getting used to the new stuff phase,
Bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah,
right? I mean, that's this stuff for most of us is only a few years old,
it is. It is.
and the capabilities change all the time. Should we jump to some more questions?
Yes, and I wanted to call out, I think I found the spot on Substack where I can see questions. There's some sort of live chat that I've dug into. And so I am now seeing questions on Substack where my Substack folks want to put them in the live chat on the live stream. So have fun, guys. I'll continue to report on those questions.
Yeah, sounds great. And I'm looking at LinkedIn, and audience, I have another question for you. The trade-off of Nate and I riffing on things versus focusing on questions. You can see this is a big experiment for us right now. Is if Nate and I riff on something for a while, it's focused on that topic. If we take the questions, then we're going to be jumping around. For example, I'm seeing questions relating both to Nano Banana and art, and I'm seeing other questions relating to that MIT study. And
And
it's
I have a third set of questions coming in here. There's ones about Microsoft, Azure, and OpenAI. And the Substackers are saying they hate LinkedIn. We've got some good old audience here. I love this.
so so let me say to your, if I may say to your Substackers, hi folks, I'm not on Substack. Um, I entice you to come over to LinkedIn. Not that I like LinkedIn particularly, but hi Substackers.
We'll get him over to Substack eventually, guys.
Well,
It'll,
then
it'll happen.
there's that too. Okay, um, let's. So regarding this point about questions versus jumping around, folks who are watching, share your feedback, okay? And also, as I said before, if you're on LinkedIn, send a LinkedIn connection request to Nate and to me so that we can invite you to the next one. LinkedIn has all these weird idiosyncrasies. So just do that. Anyway, so let's jump back to that MIT failures report. And Ian Jemison makes a really good point. He says the report is largely talking about pilot projects. If the goal of the project is to learn, then no, it won't have a measurable direct ROI. So that's a good point.
It is a good point, but I think it's a little bit circular. Because one of the things that I have noticed about pilot projects that don't have business goals associated with them is that they tend to have a failure rate even higher than the rate of projects that deliberately attempt to hit business goals, because they run inevitably into the corporate politics that keep anything that isn't on the revenue line from getting done. And so I've seen cases where they're like, we want to start out really simple and easy with AI. So we're just going to take our HR policy manual and we're going to put it into a RAG, and then people can query the RAG and they can find out what the vacation policy is. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't hit the business goals in any way. And it tends to get deprioritized. It tends to not get pushed for use. And then when you talk to someone about it, they're like, well, we didn't generate any value from it. Well, part of that is the goaling.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I've been looking through the questions. I'm like getting overwhelmed with the
Do you want me to propose a question? Because I have one that I think is really interesting here.
yeah, pose a question to me or to the audience.
Well, no, this is from the audience to us.
Oh, perfect. Great. Great.
Um, this is from Kim on Substack. Microsoft just announced that they'll switch between OpenAI and Anthropic models in Office 365. What are your thoughts? Is there some kind of impact here on Microsoft's investment or relationship with OpenAI? I'm paraphrasing very slightly, but that's the idea. I think that's a really interesting one because it gets at the ongoing, somewhat public separation between Microsoft and OpenAI, where they were very, very close a year and a half or so ago. And now it's not so much the case. Now you can see that their incentives are diverging. They are still disagreeing about how they want to structure their long-term relationship together. What had started as a partnership changed when OpenAI began to take a lot of outside investment and began to grow its valuation very, very quickly. And so I wasn't surprised to see that Microsoft is starting to bring, frankly, capability they've had in Azure for a long time into the rest of their product offering and product suite. Their incentive is to keep you using Microsoft products. That's it. And so they're going to act in accordance with that incentive.
I was just going to say, for both companies, self-interest is the guiding rule here.
Well, and they have different businesses, right? Because for Microsoft, cloud is so huge.
They're different companies. Yeah,
They're
with
just
different.
entirely different companies. Yeah.
They're different companies. You know, look, they had a love fest. Okay, we were on a summer vacation and we met each other, and
That's exactly what it was, too.
and we had a good time,
We had a
and
press conference, Mike.
and we fell in love, and we had a press conference, and then we got home, and I don't like that you do that. Well, I don't like that you do that.
Yeah.
But we're married now.
Here we are.
Well, maybe we're not married, but we're definitely living together. And
Yeah, we're definitely cohabitating. There's definitely a relationship of some form, right? Like that's the dilemma for Microsoft and OpenAI.
and they, you know, now what's interesting is will who needs the other more? Does Microsoft need OpenAI more, or does OpenAI need Microsoft more?
And that dynamic is shifting as OpenAI takes on more outside funding and starts to scale up. When OpenAI started this relationship, it was not a billion user company, and now it is, or close to.
Yeah, it's like, you know, well, part of this, yeah, we met in the summer, but I wasn't rich then.
Yep,
And I'm really rich now.
that's right.
And
That's,
oh, by the way, did you see Oracle's earning announcements last night? Oracle this morning was up like, 30% today, their stock, all
yeah.
on the back of Oracle Cloud infrastructure growth, including OpenAI.
Right. Like they are trying to push this narrative because for so long when I was in tech, Oracle was the dinosaur, right? Oracle was the old way of doing things, and everyone was trying to move you off Oracle. And Larry and his executive team are trying to really, really push the narrative that Oracle has now fully pivoted, and Oracle is going to be the backbone for the future of AI inference. And I think one of the biggest questions that really unfolds is how big is AI inference going to get? I was looking at a breakdown of the return on investment dynamics for data centers, And it's very difficult right now to get the math to math. It is hard to show that a given data center investment is going to generate conventional ROI multiples because chips depreciate fairly rapidly. And so it's not like the railroads where you put this tremendous investment in and the iron is there and like you're going to drive on that iron for a long time. You have to sort of make that money quickly. And so I think one of the biggest unanswered questions in the business right now is you have this tremendous demand for AI, but how are you going to get the data centers themselves paid for?
Yeah, it requires this enormous capital investment. And in addition, there's a set of other issues also relating, for example, to electricity and the electricity
Mm-hmm.
grid. So there's a whole host of issues. I'm gonna jump again to a question, and again, this is from Gustavo Salami for a very simple reason. He put at the front of his comment question, so I can identify it easily as a question. So I'm going to ask again. We're all figuring this out together. So I'm going to ask you folks in the audience to do two things. Okay, please. One is, can you respond to each other's questions, because you guys who are listening are really, really smart and experienced. So if you see a question and you know the answer, just respond to it. And if there's a question you like, that you think is good, just like it, and we'll see which questions get the most likes, so that, like a voting system. And if you have a question, uh, if you can put question, I don't know if maybe that's
I'm not
ask.
having trouble filtering for questions over here. Like I'm seeing people respond to comments in the Substack and respond to questions. One that hasn't been answered is this is a really interesting one that I think gets at the future of like we want to talk about jobs a little bit and how jobs are shifting and all of that. This sort of opens the door into that conversation, so I think it'd be worth grabbing. It's from Pavel on Substack. With developers increasingly using AI to write code and code reviewers using AI to review the code, how much of a concern is it to an org? And do you see change in how deployment processes work? I think that's worth answering on its own, but I think it also sort of begs the question, how is engineering changing as a job family, which opens the door into the whole jobs conversation. So I think we should kind of like go there in stages.
Well, there was this other report uh, that came out from two Harvard economics researchers, Harvard economics
Mm-hmm.
PhD students, titled Generative AI as Seniority Based Technological
I saw that.
Change.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to find it, you can easily search for it. And they made a really interesting point. They said it is junior level employment that suffers uh, from AI, and that this damages the senior level talent pipeline. So, in other words, as AI replaces junior level jobs, aside from those job displacements, you have a very significant set of implications for senior people. So, how do we train senior people if we're getting rid of our junior folks?
And I don't think we have the answer to that as a business right now, as an industry right now. And I think it's actually even more fraught, even more complicated than that, because if you look at the charts and so on, it's not that junior employees have gone to zero. It's that sort of the headcount in those roles has declined in correlation with the rollout of AI, just as the headcount in senior roles has risen. If you look at it that way, the juniors that are getting in are learning in a world where, as Pavel notes, AI is being used to write code, AI is being used to review code, uh, and they don't necessarily get the experience of engineering principles that they would have gotten in a pre-AI world. And so one of the worries that some people have that I've talked to who are senior in engineering is that the juniors coming through, even the ones that are getting hired, are not getting the grounding in engineering principles they need because they're in cursor from day one, and you don't necessarily get them to a point where they understand engineering systems so that they can actually architect those systems and be in the room and be seniors when the time comes, even if they are juniors now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean that whole apprentice system is
Mhm.
being decimated. I mean, it doesn't really exist now. Well, in some fields it does. There are like in the trades, right? You still have an explicit apprentice system. I guess you could say with doctors you have uh, interns, residents, fellows, which is a
I would
form of.
argue tech kind of was like that for a while, Mike. Like in the 2010s, it sort of worked that way.
How so? Can you be more specific?
Yeah, like I recall very vividly hiring conversations in the 2010s where you would look at an intern coming in, or you would look at someone who's entry level coming in, and they were in engineering or product or marketing, um, and you would say, I see enough in this person that I think they can grow. I think they can perform at a junior level or an intern level today, and I see potential for a high ceiling. And then you would deliberately pair them with a senior person to be a hands-on guide, and that person was responsible for getting them through those initial rocky first few months and getting them to productivity and starting to mentor them up into the next level.
Don't we call that mentorship?
We do, but I think it functioned at scale kind of like a guild, because if you think about it, you had like acknowledged experts across all of these disciplines who would then be tapped on the shoulder and said, okay, now it's your turn to sort of bring this person along.
Yeah, that has also really been affected by the pandemic
Hmm.
and people not going into the office. It's really, really hard to do that. It's much harder to do that remotely than it is in person.
It is. Yeah. It is much harder. I've found that with onboarding, it's really, really hard to onboard remotely. It's hard to onboard other people remotely.
Uh, Leo Gomes says he'd like to help me figure out the live video with QA challenge. Hey, Leo, just send me a connection request and a note.
I love that.
Okay. Um, I'll take all the help I can get. I really appreciate it. Uh, so this mentoring system doesn't change, I think, the more powerful reality that AI will eliminate certain kinds of jobs. Right? If you're a translator, I mean, remember that last time we spoke about this report from Microsoft
Hmm.
where they analyzed hundreds of thousands of uh, Microsoft Copilot chats
Hmm.
in order to determine which jobs would be most affected and
Hmm.
by AI. And uh, lock controllers, canals
Oh
and
yeah, the ones that were at the bottom of the list. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
dredge operators were at the bottom, right? I mean, if you're running a dredge in the ocean or in a
Your job is
river,
safe.
your job is safe. But on the other hand, if you're a translator, then you know, if I had kids, I wouldn't want to send my kids to translation school right now.
You know what's ironic about that? The current data that we have suggests that the number of translators hasn't yet been affected. We would need to look it up, every few months to see how that shifts, because that can be a trailing edge indicator. But I wonder if one of the cross-cutting currents in this whole conversation is the idea of accountability. And so if you're a translator for a corporate for a corporate entity, they want a wringable neck, right? They want someone they can call up and say, you screwed up this translation, and now, 500 people in Japan think that our washing machine looks like this, right? Or works like this, and it's your fault. You got it wrong. And you can't do that with the AI.
Where this really comes into play is in medicine,
Hmm.
because this issue is so fundamental because AI is taking over. Taking over is too strong a term. AI is making inroads into medical diagnosis, and accountability in medicine is everything. It's one thing to get a translation wrong, to miss a few words. It's another to make a mistake. This is part of the
That's right.
cultural change of how do we deal with this.
Well, and it gets at something that like comes back to medicine, to engineering, to any field where you have specialization and you're trying to figure out what to do. I think that one of the things that humans are really built for is understanding that this person has this job and they're accountable for that job and they go and do that job. But now we have a world where maybe that person is still accountable for the role. The doctor is accountable or the engineer is accountable for pushing the code, but they have an assistant. They have someone else in the mix. And I use someone loosely. They have another machine intelligence in the mix that is working to help them. And they are responsible for figuring out how that works. And I think that we would do better as a society if we started to establish some norms around where we think there's a level of assistance that's appropriate for those situations. So, in what situations does the doctor have an obligation to consult ChatGPT because the diagnosis is statistically better? In what situations does the doctor have an obligation not to potentially? In what situations does the engineer have an obligation to double check because sometimes the LLM will go through a particular code and produce a different result because it's a non-deterministic system functionally? And so we need to have those conversations, and we're so used to a much simpler way of organizing ourselves.
Yeah, it's because the historically we did not look to computer systems for creation, so to speak. Because
Mhm.
if you're diagnosing, if you're looking a radiologist looking at an X-ray, for example, to me that falls into the category of creation because you are making a comparison between this two-dimensional representation that you see
Mhm.
against your own internal body of knowledge, aided by your intellect and your intuition in order to make a decision.
Mhm.
And to me, that's a creative act. And historically, we didn't think about computers as they were mechanistic, it's like big adding
Mhm.
machines.
Mhm.
So there's a difference in how we anthropomorphize computers, and with good reason. It's like, hey, you can't put a good computer down.
Well, it gets at this idea. So I published a video today on reading, right? Like, and a little sort of article on reading and how we read in the age of AI. And I think that you might look at that at the surface and say, well, Nate has a lot of books, and so this is about reading books. But it's more than that. It's about this idea that you're talking about, Mike, where you say, how do we read, where we bring our experience to bear, we look at something new and we start to metabolize it and sort of pull it together. And it doesn't have to be a book, right? It can be reading an X-ray. It can be reading a section of code. It's this act of sort of bringing in new information against our existing experience, and it's the act of figuring out where do we do that and read deeply versus where does the machine read for us, and how much do we trust the machine to read for us in particular situations?
The trust part, I think, is easier because the hallucinations will decline over time. That will get better. But it goes to the heart of the kind of skills we're developing. For example, what is the value? I love music. Let me preface this. What is the value of somebody who is a great musician or a composer when you can program the AI to create music that's really, really good? There's some obvious answers to that, but this also uh, raises questions.
And I think one of the things that we have not fully sort of process through is like we live in sort of a pop era where like music and audience and celebrity are all sort of in this overlapping Venn diagram. And so, the story of Sabrina Carpenter and her new album that dropped is as much about the controversy around the album and the album cover as it is about her headlining Coachella, as it is about the music itself. And so we're used to this all being sort of overlapping. And one of the things that AI music does is it sort of pushes that apart because you don't have a celebrity there. you don't necessarily have a personality there. You just have the music. And it may be good and it may not be good. But either way, it's different from the way we usually experience music these days.
Well, there's a lot that's going to be different. Hey, just for kicks, I'm going to show people what I'm actually looking at and why this is so hard sometimes. Can you guys see this? That is this is basically the Nate and Mike control center. And that's
Oh, look
why,
at that.
yeah, and I'm looking at this and trying to get the questions at the same time. But I want to really thank those folks on LinkedIn who are responding to each other's questions. And if you're in Substack, also you should do the same because
Oh,
that
they're
really,
definitely doing that over on Substack. We're getting answers back and forth.
oh, that's great. And folks on LinkedIn, help your fellow LinkedInites out by answering their questions. But on this subject of LLMs on LinkedIn, Jonathan Cousins has a really good one. He says, can LLMs be leveraged to perform the role of a mentor? Would you expect interns in 2025 and beyond coming into an interview having invested in pre-mentoring? How's that?
That's a great question. I think it's already happening in practice. Like people who are coming into interviews are using AI to prepare extensively now. Whether you call it mentorship, whether you call it interview prep, uh, there's a lot invested in basically taking advantage of the fact that you have this intelligence in your pocket that has probably read up on the company you're interviewing for, has probably read a lot more than you have on the job family you're in, and you can work with them. I think where it falls down is that classical mentorship is very context rooted, and it assumes you're in a particular problem space, you have a particular situation you're trying to solve, and it helps you take that general body of knowledge and apply it. That is the gap that I see that is really hard for AI knowledge bases to cross right now.
Well, we have kind of a related question from Ed O'Connell, who says there are so many emerging approaches to long-term memory in AI. He says Mem0, LangGraph, and others. From your perspective, what's the best way for someone to evaluate which approach actually fits their needs? He's especially interested in two contexts. One, as an individual developer trying to manage complex software projects, and at the institutional level where real organizational memory is at stake. And with so many solutions, how can we tell what's signal and what's noise? But it gets right to the heart of institutional memory and what matters.
Oh, it's such a good question. I feel like there's like two big categories, right? Like the organizations I talk to are first trying to figure out how they take data that they view as proprietary and valuable and get it into some format that they can use with AI. So there's that whole piece of like moving our data out of a traditional database into a RAG system or something like that. And then there's the whole question of what is the memory that matters that isn't written down, where that we sometimes call institutional memory, right? The memory where like, Beth in accounting knows how this particular invoice system works, or this product manager knows how this particular workaround works and can explain it to customers in a way nobody else can. And that is highly valuable information. It's almost never written down well, and it's difficult to get anybody else in the organization to understand it because everyone has their other jobs, let alone to get AI to understand it. And I think it's actually one of the biggest questions in business right now is what do businesses do with that kind of information?
Yeah, well, when we were talking about mentoring, so much of mentoring is about that retained institutional knowledge. But it also raises another related question, which is we now have the massive encyclopedia in the sky that knows everything.
Yeah, we do. And but what's it being called now? Like the people who are sort of trying to transition out of SEO or just calling it AEO, answer engine optimization.
Yeah, so we've got, the whole SEO thing is another category. I mean, people are always trying to game the system. And
Yeah.
I shouldn't cast aspersion on SEO. I realize look, Google is your silent partner if you're creating content. It doesn't matter who you are. Uh, Google is your silent partner.
Mhm.
And if you think about TikTok and TikTok videos, and Nate, you're the expert in this, but what's the structure of a TikTok video? Focused, to the point, start with your initial hook to
Mhm.
grab people. And that's a nod to, okay, in this case, not Google, but it's a nod to basically the same thing, to your TikTok overlord. Am I not correct? Is that wrong?
No, and I think one of the things that you learn if you're sort of on different channels is that the algorithms work really differently. And you sort of start to understand what the algorithm is going to reward, what the algorithm expects you to do, and you start to adjust to that. And so content is not just content. Content is shaped by the algorithmic environment.
Yeah. So anyway, so SEO, that's what that's about. Hey, you want to take a question from Substack? I've been pulling them from LinkedIn.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many good ones here. I think that one of the ones that I kind of want to dig into a little bit is we've talked a fair bit about this idea of hallucinations, and Benjamin on Substack has a spicy take, which I think is worth bringing up and talking through. He says, I doubt hallucinations will go away as AI systems get more advanced. I would argue that the more general the AI becomes, the more vulnerable it is to social engineering attacks. And I think that gets at one of the really interesting questions right now, which is how how do we understand what advanced intelligence or better AI is in a world where we have so many capabilities we expect of those systems? And I think that question is tied together with the idea of hallucinations because the more an AI can do, the more opportunity it has to do something unwanted, which is, I think, my best way of explaining what a hallucination is. It's sort of like a weed in the garden. It's an unwanted plant. Well, a hallucination is an unwanted answer.
That's the yeah, I mean that's the definition of non-deterministic AI tools, right? That's what we're talking about is you give in an answer, you put in a question, and am I allowed to curse here?
I don't know. We haven't figured that out.
Yeah. So you put in a question and it gives you shit out the other end.
Yeah, yeah.
But you don't know how good that is until you try it out. And that's the nature of it. And all of these techniques like RAG and all of these companies are working trying to put boundaries so that it only gives you questions relating to your data and not making stuff up.
Well, and the challenge is that the deeper you go into the question, the more multidimensional it gets. Like I think that Benjamin is right that there's a degree to which reasoning and inference can sometimes make the AI backtrack and confuse itself when it's trying to answer a question that is in a particular domain that it feels like it needs to train to reinforcement learning data versus the question you gave it, which is a lot of the reason why sort of writing styles are sticky on some of these systems. And then there's also the dimension that you're talking about where you're in a rag and you're telling it to retrieve. And what if it does retrieve from the rag, but it retrieves the wrong thing from the rag, or it puts the things together in a way that doesn't make sense? So it retrieves the quarterly number from Q1 and it associates it with Q2 because of the way you use chunking strategies. Um, and that's not something that's easy to solve. And I think that I am beginning to wonder if instead of talking about hallucinations as this sort of sloped line that goes to zero eventually or whatever it is, we think about it as the opposite. How do we start to recognize that AI systems are going to be a part of our workflows in a wide variety of domains? And our goal in each domain is to define positively what good work from the AI system looks like in a fairly high degree of detail. What does good engineering work from AI look like? What does good product work look like? What does good CS work look like? And then how do we start to measure positive performance, and then we can start to measure defects from there. But we've spent so much time talking about this general category of defect called hallucinations. I think we miss some of that opportunity to get more specific?
Well, there's creativity, right? I mean, the hallucinations are the definition of creativity, but I'm not sure that's really what you're asking.
I don't think that's really what I'm asking. I think what I'm suggesting maybe goes back to this idea of mentorship and roles and like how we read AI and bring AI in. It's this idea that there is a missing category of information or discourse or conversation that we should be having now that we have these systems and everyone has them in their pocket, where we don't know and we haven't talked about and we don't have an agreement among the best in the business as to what good work looks like. So, as an example, in the product realm, what does good chat assisted product requirement documentation look like? What in the engineering realm does a good code structure that an LLM can read and contribute to, but that isn't croft, that isn't slop after a year look like? And you can go into other fields and kind of extend that. But the idea of like what is good work is under discussed, I think.
Yeah, I just read a study that said that there are relatively few AI productivity gains because by the time you, or that those gains are very often an illusion, because by the time you figure out your prompt, by the time you wrangle back and forth with the AI and then clean it up, and if you're a lawyer, for example, make sure that it hasn't invented case law for you and filter all that out, that you could have just done it yourself.
So I'm gonna get spicy. I take some issue with the way that is framed because I read the same thing. I saw the same results, but the anecdotes don't match the data. And one of the things I learned when I was at Amazon is if the anecdotes don't match the data, the anecdotes are right and you're not measuring it right. And so I want to suggest that part of the way we traditionally frame productivity is we take a standard job family and we say, is it better? Right? Do we go farther? Do we get more done in a day? But the stories I'm hearing don't fit that category very well. So a good example this is a public story. I think I can share this. There was a dinner in Stockholm for creators on Lovable.dev, which is headquartered there, and they brought out some like people who were like creating really interesting software. And one of the stories that popped out was a woman who taught Polish-speaking people in Warsaw how to speak English. She was an English teacher, and she had a proprietary system. There's a particular way that she wanted to teach Polish speakers English, and she had like 20,000 flashcards and a special system for like associating images and words. And it was this whole thing she evolved over years. She never programmed, she never did anything with code. And she used Lovable to take her entire 20,000 card system and turn it into a usable app. I can't think of any argument that would suggest that's not a productivity gain for her. It's a game changer for her, but it doesn't show up in traditional measurement. Like, is she like, you know what I mean? Like, that's not inside her traditional job family.
Yeah, actually, on LinkedIn, Ryan Kyle says productivity gains are often in productivity, not in ROI. But
Mm.
that doesn't solve the problem because that's essentially what Nate's point is, that we know that there's a productivity gain because it's obvious, but it doesn't show up in ROI. And for her, it's not going to show up in ROI unless she has an ROI metric. So is she selling these things? Is she creating new ones and she can measure her output? Or maybe
I think
she's,
there's an idea of monetization for this, but like it sort of goes beyond the one story, right? Like when you have the ability to put this into software in a way that you didn't before, you open the door to like the one person business, which we see a lot of examples of in the last year or so that we just didn't see before.
that is, see, that's the unknown part right now. That's the part of the equation that says, how will AI change what we do in many different, and that's why AI stocks are so high in the market. That's why billions and billions and billions of dollars are being invested in data centers by the hyperscalers and by others. It's because we all have this sense that AI is going to do something great, but we don't know how it's going to fundamentally change our lives. And I think the reason for this is because to date, for the most part, AI has has been, shall we say, point solution. So, for example, they solve a particular problem. So, for example, Adobe is doing a lot with AI, talking about in Photoshop the ability to remove a background, to automate,
Hmm.
to take this, to change
Hmm.
this, to change that. So that is a game changer and enables you to do something different that you couldn't easily do before and to do it
Hmm.
better. But does that change your life? Does that fundamentally change the way you relate to creating art in the world?
I
And
think
and
it.
and and, and let me just, I'm sorry,
Yeah, go
and
ahead. You finish, and then I'll take my take. Yeah.
to does it fundamentally change how you create art in the world, and does that fundamentally change the nature of your career?
I think it does. Someone on the Substack, Christopher on the Substack, actually had a question back that I think is a great way of putting that. What was the ROI for finance teams when they learned Excel? I don't know if we actually measured that, but Excel is ubiquitous across finance now. Another article that I saw pop up on my feed today that I think sort of underscores that is this idea that these tools are about democratizing access to previously complex pieces of work. And we, in that world, we find that we have new peers. We find that we have new ways of working and creativity unleashed because there's just more people in the system. Um, and the article that I was reading basically suggested that AI is the greatest accessibility lever that we've ever seen. It's the greatest leveler for people of all abilities to be able to do a complex task because it makes things so much easier. It makes writing easier. It makes, as we're seeing, image editing easier. It makes so many things are at basically your ability to speak and communicate intent. Like that becomes the barrier now, is your ability to show this is what I want. And so the question then becomes, is the future people who are able to communicate intent with high fidelity and with genuine insight into what needs to be done. Like they have like high grade intent that other people are going to get excited about them sort of building from.
Intent. So is that the core issue here? What we're trying to accomplish, our intention?
Is that the new grade for quality work? That's something I'm sort of wrestling with because the people who use AI and make the most of it are people who have intent that maps deeply onto the ultimate outcome of the task that they're going for. And I sometimes see this with high level individual contributors in companies where their intent aligns really well. They're able to communicate it to the AI. They know exactly where they're going. They know where the outcome is. They know what they need to do to get there. For founders, it's sometimes about aligning intent to the marketplace, aligning intent to the customer. And so when I think about sort of prompting, people often ask me for prompting tips and tricks. And, Lord knows I've published lots about that. But it's about intent at heart. It's how do you communicate intent in a way that is clear and deeply congruent with the outcome you're looking for.
I don't know. The Michelle Clark, let me just jump. I'm just jumping at random here onto LinkedIn because Michelle Clark asks this question that's right directly relating to this. She says, it's not about intent per se. That's not enough. Setting and managing expectations is the big failure with AI's rollout so far. Where are
Mm,
the communications pros? We we know how to do change management, but we're not doing it.
that's an interesting question because I think the answer that I would give, having sort of looked at organizations rolling out AI, is that that is both an absolutely astounding yes and also no. And so maybe we can open up both and see sort of what we think. In a sense, I think yes, it's true that organizations are investing less in their people than in the tech for this. And so I would say like 10% of the overall AI budget right now is going to people change. And that doesn't seem correct to me. And I think that good change management would suggest that we do something different.
So
Also, yeah, go
no,
ahead. And
no,
then
I
I'll
didn't
make a
mean to interrupt. Please,
yeah.
please.
No, the second piece, the sort of the contrasting thing is that I see that people are treating change management when they do it as if this is just another technology that needs to go through traditional change management practices. And then when we get out the other side, we'll have all adjusted to the change. And that is also breaking down because this is a general purpose technology and it doesn't respond to traditional change management that's sort of predicated on the idea of like, here's a new software, or here's a new process, or here's a new sort of organizational structure that we all need to adjust to. And so I think it's kind of yes and no.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hesitant on this one because for decades now, the problem with enterprise technology, as we discussed earlier, was the integrating the technology into processes. And do you adapt your processes to the new technology and to do things that are better? Do you fit the technology into what you used to do before, but was inefficient? I mean, I don't have to rehash all of this, but I do have a question for you, Nate, which
Mm-hmm.
is you said that there is a very small amount of investment in people as opposed to in tools.
Mm-hmm.
So, are you calling all of these enterprise execs who are talking about how much they're investing in their people and how much they care liars?
I think that we have always had a public narrative from companies about the importance of people and investing in people. Um, I think that in this situation, it's not so much that like it's about the drama of saying they're liars as it's about the implicit assumption that investing 10% of the budget in people is enough because it's a relatively easy technology to learn because you can sit down with it and see the chatbot and use it. And so the executive basically says, why would I invest more than 10%? I am investing in my people. This is enough. And so the mental model needs to shift that this is actually a much more complex tool than they might realize at first glance.
Well, I will say that the consulting companies, the large consulting companies, have invested literally billions over the last number of
Mm-hmm.
years in an ongoing series of investments in retraining, reskilling their people and tools. But that also makes sense because their stock and trade is people expertise.
That's right. Like they're heavily incentivized. We have a question from Gustavo in the Substack that ties right into this. And the question is, what do we think about OpenAI's announced plans for certification for potentially an AI-driven job market facilitated by OpenAI? This ties into the jobs question. It ties into the productivity question. It ties into certification. All kinds of things we've been talking about this hour.
You know, I think this is not much more than standard enterprise software, enterprise technology maturity.
Mm,
You have a company, you have a product, it becomes popular.
mhm.
You are trying to grow your customer base, and they want training, and you build a certification program. So I don't make too much out of it. Do you think I'm missing something? To me, this is just standard, straight vanilla enterprise software growth playbook.
I think it's the same playbook, but I think you have to filter it through the ambition that this company has demonstrated for everything else it's gone after. This is the company that hired away Johnny Ive and basically is trying to create the next massive iPhone, right? Whatever that's going to be, we haven't seen what it is yet, but they have the ambition. My suspicion is the larger ambition is to disrupt LinkedIn and the LinkedIn job market and to answer in public the charge that's being leveled at them and other major model makers that the technology that they're peddling is going to be net a drag because it's going to harm the job market. And so they want to basically come back and say, no, we're good actors. We know that the current sort of job pipeline is really broken because AI-powered applications are getting reviewed by recruiters who may be using AI, and so nobody's getting anything done. And instead of being like Cluely and saying, well, you can cheat your way through it, they're going to say, we're going to be the good actor. We're going to facilitate this. And that's partly a PR move. It's partly what you're talking about, where it's a very standard move, and then it's filtered throughout their ambition. And I think they're trying to make it bigger.
Yeah, I think that it's a good point. AI, the one fundamental difference between OpenAI and everybody else has been that meteoric growth. And
Yeah.
somebody also on LinkedIn made that comment earlier about this potential interest in being the new LinkedIn. Some interesting arguments to be made in favor of that, by the way.
I mean, I think you're seeing it like it's funny for me to read the Substack chat because the Substack audience does not want to go to LinkedIn. My TikTok audience does not want to go to LinkedIn. My YouTube audience does not want to go to LinkedIn. Like there's a strong aversion factor to that makes me suspect they're ripe for disruption. But no one has really quite put the pieces together to figure out what disruption looks like.
Yeah, but I mean, come on, how many users? How can you compare the number of users of Substack uh,
But you
to
can't.
LinkedIn?
That's why disruption is hard. You're exactly right. Is that you have like multiple billions of users on LinkedIn, I think at this point. And it's the gorilla in the room.
And Randall G said on LinkedIn says LinkedIn is broken. So listen, folks, once again, if you're asking questions on LinkedIn, send a connection request to Nate and to me so that we can invite you next time to these chats. And by the way, we've had a number of questions asking about the technical setup. And so let me
Hmm.
just briefly tell folks what it is. This is especially on Substack. So we have folks who are sort of cross-pollinating between LinkedIn and Substack, or I should say Substack and LinkedIn, and transmitting questions from Substack over to LinkedIn. So basically the setup is this, that Nate and I are talking over Zoom. Nate connects to a standard Zoom call. That goes into Zoom Rooms. And we use Zoom Rooms because for a couple of reasons. One is it takes processing away from the local computer from my computer and segregates it onto a separate machine, which happens to be a Mac. And and it also does a very high quality 1080p video. And then from the Mac that you guys can't see off to the side here, we use a protocol called NDI, which is vaguely like Bluetooth, but for video. It lets you transmit video over IP that then gets fed into this switcher here. I don't know if you can see the mouse moving, but the thing that I'm looking at, and I can give you a closer look. You guys are really
We've had a
geeky.
request to switch off the technical mic to get back to the AI question, so let's make sure that we do that.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so it's called
And people are
vMix.
offering to like send me advice on how to make this better. So I think what we should do is give the audience homework to like get in touch with you or me and give us advice on how to make it better, and we'll just see what works.
Yeah, and especially the chat.
Yeah.
We can figure out the chat. Anything else interesting that you're seeing on Substack right at the moment?
Well, Claude is down. That's one of the things that we should probably say. Literally during this live stream, Claude has gone down, and I think it gets at this idea of reliability and the challenges that come with these tools that we keep talking about. Yeah, they're everywhere, right? We're going to use them all the time. Well, we can't use them if they go down. And both OpenAI and Claude have had very public issues with reliability. And what's funny is, I don't see the same reports of things going down as often with Gemini, but it doesn't get talked about as much.
Yeah, this is IT failures. I used to write a lot about and study IT failures a long time ago. And again, I separate all of this stuff into really two buckets: AI specific and general tech and
Mm.
change issues. And, look, historically, there have been times Salesforce has gone down, there have been times Gmail has gone down. The broader problem is how deeply entrenched these cloud-based tools are. And we run our lives and our businesses on these tools. And when they go down, which eventually they will, Sometimes it can have nothing to do with the provider itself. I mean, there could be a DNS problem, for
Hmm.
example. Uh, and then you're dead in the water. It's like, hey, if the
Yep.
electricity goes out, you're screwed.
Yep. Yep. And people are pointing out that Google has like this 13 nines of reliability culture that is helping them with this situation. And I think that engineering culture is absolutely at play in a positive way. Um, I do have a couple of questions coming in over here. Kim asks, given bold predictions that AI agents will be common workplace tools by 2025, how realistic is that actually turning out to be, especially around deployment at scale, safety, and ROI? And then I'm going to add one specific prediction that got a lot of press in the last week or two, which is Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic that makes Claude, saying 90% of code will be written by AI in 2025. And people are taking turns arguing over how true that is. And I think that it's a nice doorway into that question set.
Well, look, code is one of the primary areas that large software companies are using to replace people right now.
It
So,
yeah. It's interesting. Did you see Goldman rolled out Devon to their entire organization yesterday?
oh no, I didn't see that.
So it's absolutely happening. I think that one of the things that probably doesn't get talked about enough is that organizations like Anthropic live in Silicon Valley, and the people they talk with are startup founders, and startup founders are coming out and saying, yeah, 95% of the code we write is written by AI. And then public companies that want to talk about it are saying that they're not at that goal. And I think one of the more interesting questions, because the obvious one is like, well, the big company has a harder time changing. Well, fine. But is it even the right metric for a larger company? Because if you set for an organization of 10,000 engineers, your goal is to have 95% of your code written by AI, you're not putting any quality metrics in place there. You're not talking about functionality. You're not talking about product market fit. You're not talking about anything that sort of goes with clean code, clean architecture, deleting lines of code, not writing too much. And so you may get into a situation where a goal by a CEO who wants to get you to use his product is getting used by other CEOs to push for changes in their engineering org that may not be helpful long term if it's a large business.
Yeah, but Mark Benioff from Salesforce came out not too long ago and he said, we laid off all of these people because
Glad
AI
you
is
brought
writing
that up.
code.
I'm so glad you brought that up because if you look at the hiring pattern for Salesforce for the last 2 years, they laid off much less than they hired over the last 2 years during which AI was coming on the scene. And one of the comments that I've seen circulating among leadership not at Salesforce is that Mark wants to cover up the fact that he overhired. And he wants to call it AI, and it isn't.
Well, that is very interesting. Had not thought about that one, but it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility. I can tell you historically, when I was studying IT failures, it would definitely happen that there was some business issue. For example, a company can't ship its products. And it had to do not so much with the technology, but with some other stuff going on at the company. But it was really easy to blame IT.
Hmm.
Oh, our systems went down because IT screwed up. But in fact, our systems went down because there was some finance problem, whatever it might be. And it is very convenient. And Mark is the genius master of presentation, communications, and PR. And he
Yes.
knows how to take anything and turn it around so that it's positive for
Yep.
Salesforce. We don't know the
Exactly
truth.
right.
We don't know the truth behind the scenes as you point out.
No, and that's one of the things that I think doesn't create trust, right? Like if you're looking in this world and it feels like it's uncertain, and for junior talent it feels like there's even more uncertainty because of what we've talked about in this time together. It doesn't build trust when you're looking at the statements from leadership and you can't tell what is substantive and what is AI washing.
Yeah, but again, I mean, maybe I'm jaded just because I've been just around the tech industry for so long, but I remember going to enterprise software keynotes, and especially when I started my career, which is going back a while now,
Yeah.
sitting in the audience and not being able to tell what's hype and what's real
Yeah. Like
because
that's
it's
not
the
a new problem you're saying.
no, that is not a new, it's not a new problem. I mean, it's just come to the fore right now
Right.
because we all have this intuition that AI is going to have such profound implications across so many different domains, which I believe it will.
Yeah. Yeah.
But all of the, we sometimes forget that all of these companies that are making these huge investments and making all of this PR noise, these are for-profit entities. These are killers. The people running multi-billion dollar valuation companies, this is not like happening in a garage out back.
No,
The
no, it's a big, big, big companies with big claims and big resources, etc.
and a lot at stake, and these guys are killers. They want to win.
Yeah, they do. They do. And those
So
incentives really shape how we're having this conversation.
the incentives are all, you spoke about intention earlier. The incentives, the intentions are all important.
That's right. That's right. We have another question coming in. I think it's a really good one because it sort of brings us back to how people use AI and sort of the day-to-day experience. One of the big shifts in the sort of conversation in 2025 has been moving from this idea of prompting and prompt engineering, and I'm using the scare quotes, but over to context engineering, to this idea that you're not just doing a prompt, but you're actually talking about how the whole context of the prompt works. And I think it is widely misunderstood. Like people sometimes say, well, it's just the same as prompting. People sometimes will say that it's only for production pipelines, that production pipelines care about context engineering and ordinary people shouldn't. I'd be curious for your take. I have a take as well. What do you think, Mike?
Context matters a lot. The, another interesting aspect of LLMs is we think that the LLM is tailored to us. We ask a question, it knows what we need,
Mm-hmm.
but it knows what we need because we've told it, either explicitly through providing sufficient context in the prompt, or in the case of OpenAI, for example, and I think Anthropic is now doing this through some type of memory function where it is simultaneously reading your previous chats so it knows about you. So I think that context, call it what you want, giving it enough information is the key to prompting, actually.
Yeah, they're tightly related. I think the reason, or maybe the differentiator between context and prompting for me is prompting is very intuitively like what you actually write. You might write it in a development environment and give it to a production pipeline, and this is your system instructions. You might write it in the chat bot. But either way, you're directly instructing the model at something. Context is broader. It includes that piece, and then it includes a bunch of other stuff. And as models get more tools and more capabilities, that other stuff gets bigger. And so if I tell Perplexity, here's some direct instructions, and then go search the web, I don't even have to tell it to search the web, it just does it. The context for the response is like 99% tokens that it scoured across the web and 1% what I gave it. And I think that's one of the key things that makes people sort of say aha when they realize what context engineering is that you're essentially using this tiny little prompt that you can directly control, like a rudder on a boat, to shape where this gigantic sort of context slice that the model's going to grab for its response is going to come from. And that might be from your RAG internally if you were using a corporate tool. It might be from calling an MCP server. It might be from surfing the internet. But all of this gigantic piece of context is shaped by that rudder of a prompt that you use. And so I think that's sort of how I think about that relationship.
Yeah, it's an interesting and a very hard question because as the LLM, excuse me, is searching across the web to find relevant background and context to inform its response to you, in order for that response to be useful to you, it needs to have a way to filter out the stuff that's not relevant and not useful. But the only way, actually, I'm going to correct, I was going to say the only way it knows what you want is what you've just prompted it. But a really smart LLM knows that as a human being, you have intellectual consistency. And so,
Mm,
therefore, your worldview, as reflected in the questions you ask, will shape how it relates to you, which is the essence, really, of that memory function. But the discrimination between what's relevant and what's not, I think you start to get into what they call super intelligence. It's not artificial general intelligence, it's more than that. It's not
I,
just the,
I don't know
no?
that I agree on that one. That's good. We disagree. It's going to be a spicy take. Um, I think,
How can you disagree with that?
well, I don't disagree that like memory matters, right? Like they absolutely, you're talking about how memory works. On OpenAI, it works as sort of encoding memories and like referring to these sort of snippets that you can see on Claude, you're searching past chats. So yes, it looks at sort of the past experiences you've had. I'm not sure that I agree that it goes so far as forming a consistent mental model of your responses as an example. And so I don't think the superintelligence claim is fair at this time. As an example, I have a lot of arguments with Claude right now about Claude's ability to not only remember past interaction models that I've had, but to keep that same preference for how I like it to answer in the current conversation. It will sometimes go and do what you just described. It will search the past chat, but then it will come back and it will not do what I've told it to do with the memories. It will not be able to actually take that aboard because the system prompt from the model maker is so strong that it overrides the memory feature.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply we have superintelligence now. What I'm saying is to do this really well, maybe it is all a matter of a mechanistic approach where the system prompt has to be balanced and eventually they'll get that right. And the machine will simply give the illusion of not just consciousness, but of understanding me,
Mm.
who I am. But that illusion, how is that different from super intelligence?
That's an interesting question. I think that's probably going to have to be for next time because we're running up against time.
I know we
We
could
can
go
talk
on
about
for,
super intelligence next time. Yeah, I think that's a fair call out. I think I understand better what you're trying to say here, and there's a lot to unpack there. Like, what does super intelligence mean? Do we have a common definition? Do we understand what we expect? And it kind of gets at the fuzzy wudginess, fizzy wizziness around what general intelligence is and why we argue about it so much. Is because I don't think we share a common definition.
we are almost out of time. Can we just talk for a moment about us
Yeah,
and about the
absolutely.
audience? So, as everybody, I think because we've said it a few times, people who are listening on Substack and YouTube and maybe Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, has been an experiment and a really great and fun experiment. This is the second time. We want to do more of these. But how? So I have two questions for you guys in the audience, and please think about this. Give us feedback. how do we manage the fact that there are audiences in different places? We have the Substack crowd and the LinkedIn crowd, and these are more or less walled gardens. They don't intermingle. I'm not on Substack. Um, so how do we manage the chat? A related question to that is, well, see, it's the LinkedIn is horrible for chat. I have to it doesn't refresh
Mhm.
automatically. So every time I want to see the chats, I have to refresh the screen and then manually select show the most recent ones. So it's really bad. And then I lose track of what Nate is saying. So how do we manage that? Please, you guys are smarter than us. So can you figure it out and tell us, please? Or if you have ideas? That's number one. And number two, how can Nate and I do this better? Give us critical feedback. What would you like us to talk about? How would you like us to do this? How often should we do this? Tell us, please.
Well, and I think another related question you and I were talking about is, does it make sense for us to bring a guest on and like have a conversation with a guest for part of the show? Is that something that would be fun for folks? And like that helps us to sort of figure out like, is there a theme to the show? Do we want to talk about a particular person? Um, yeah. So I think that's another question that would be interesting to sort of dig into.
Yeah, so you guys, and again, if you're on LinkedIn, please send me and Nate connection requests so that we can connect to you. Um, I put out a LinkedIn. I have a newsletter for CXO Talk, but I do a new LinkedIn newsletter as well, and I announce these there when we create these events. So if you
Hmm.
subscribe to that, then if you're on LinkedIn, you'll get the announcement. Any final thoughts, folks in the audience?
People are
What is
saying we should vibe code an app for chat, which I don't entirely disagree with.
I barely have enough time to breathe, let alone vibe code an app for anything.
Maybe I'll have a look at it at some point.
So
That would be fun. I think that one of the things uh, that I want to call out is also from the people are saying that they really appreciate that we're picking out questions over on Substack, and so that like the responsiveness to the audience is something that they're appreciating. Um, I think one that I think would be interesting is, and this is a little bit philosophical, but maybe it's a good like final 2 or 3 minutes. When I ask the same question of Claude versus OpenAI versus Gemini versus whatever else, I get different answers. How has what I've done in the tool in the past perhaps changed that? Or maybe if it's someone who's new, why do those answers tend to differ? I think this gets at like part of the challenge in teaching people to use these tools, and maybe we can kick it around a little bit for the last couple of minutes.
I'm sorry, I was looking at the, see, this is ask that one. Oh, the differences. See, this is again,
Yeah,
the
like between
chat
different
issue.
models. Like you ask the same
Yeah.
question, you get different answers. Like why is that the case, Mike? Why if I ask OpenAI, why is it different than Claude?
Why, if you ask OpenAI the same question 5 minutes later, you
Hmm.
get a different answer? I
Also
think
true.
I think different models have different strengths. Rather than ask why that is the case, personally, I ask the question of what model is most useful for a particular reason. So, for example,
Yeah.
if I want to do a research report, I am going to use, I've been subscribing, still on the fence, to ChatGPT Pro. So it's 200
Hmm.
bucks a month, sprung for it. And if I want something in depth, I'm going to do deep research. On the other hand, if I want better quality writing, I'm going to go to Claude. And I use the Claude console. So it's not filtered by, Perplexity or what have you.
I think that's a really good call out, that you look at what the strengths of the model are. And I think the other one is recognizing that iterativeness is just part of the way we create things now. And so if you don't like a particular response, iterate with it and see where you go. Because you are going to get different answers, and getting used to the idea that it's not one response, it can be multiple I find it's a big aha moment for people.
I was helping somebody just yesterday who wanted to use AI and LLM to help write some social media posts. And this person writes the posts themselves, and I was saying, hey, you should see if it can help you in some way.
Hmm.
And we got stuck in this prompting nightmare.
Hmm.
And if you don't know how to prompt in the age of AI, you're basically illiterate. How's
Yeah.
that?
It sounds like it's a spicy take, but it doesn't sound spicy to me, Mike. It feels like it's one of the things that if you're a kid coming up, like our schooling systems need to teach prompting. It needs to be in the ABCs.
Uh, yeah, I mean, just like calculators, there was a time when kids in school didn't use calculators.
Yeah.
I'm old enough that I remember in uh, junior high school, maybe it was elementary school, uh, the introduction of calculators.
I remember having to take tests and being told like you may not use a calculator for this test. Use your pencil, right? Like work through it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe it was in high school, whenever it was. So that'll happen with AI as well.
Yep.
So we're out of time. I'm really hoping Greg Walter says he used an abacus and a slide rule. And Ryan Kyle says he it was probably from middle school onward. Uh, so again, you folks in the audience, can you send us a note? Send Nate a
Mhm.
note. Send me notes. Tell us what you want to hear. Give us advice on how to handle this chat situation. Connect on LinkedIn and tell us what will make this useful for you and fun and what we should do. And by the way, you can solve all of our other problems too.
Well, and I'm gonna say one thing for the Substack audience. This is your chance to take a topic that we have talked about on this live stream and come back to me in the Substack chat and say, Nate, I want you to write something about this or do a video on this. Let me know. I would love to hear your suggestions.
Sounds good. So are we done? This is, as you can see, folks, as you can see, this ain't scripted.
I think we're done for today. I have to run, so let's call it good.
Okay. So till next time, and we'll put the
Until
word
next time,
out.
Mike.
We'll we'll
Um,
we'll figure out a date.
it'll get smoother every time. How about that? We're gonna get a little bit better every time.
That works for me. Nate, it's always a pleasure. I can't wait to do this again.
Yep, me too. All right, talk soon, sir.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk with you soon. Have a good one.
Bye bye.
Bye now.